Now, once students have a repertoire of about 5 sounds, they can start reading simple decodable picture books, so they can begin reading. They are also introduced to phonetically irregular sight words when they first start out. So these aren't held off for later, like the words like A-R-E for R, or W-E-R-E for were. You know, those are things that don't necessarily fit phonetic rules, but they're introduced anyway. You try to get them to read them first. Initially, you have to just teach them anyway. In a native speaking environment, of course, they would have already heard these words many times, and so it would be a little bit less work to get them to recognize them. But even then, with the irregular words, they would draw their focus to phonetic cues, like in you are, like R, they would focus on the letter R. You say, oh, look, there's a letter R in here. So that's sort of why you say R. Or with U for Y-O-U, you focus on maybe the U in there, or maybe some of the Y sound in Y. So you try to bring them as close, and make them aware as much as possible of the phonetic sounds in the word. And finally, the critical difference is that students must figure out new words for themselves. You teach the sounds, and then the child reads the word. And then you confirm and support them later to perfect pronunciation or to make sure they get meaning down. So if they're struggling, you might just say, it's like, I don't know, let's compare start, right? You'd say, tss, and what's the T sound? Tss. It's the A sound, ah, 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 right? And get them to remember those sounds that you've already taught them, and then so get them blended together. So if you blend it all together, how does it sound? And say, start, then that's close enough to say, okay, yeah, start. And you sort of help them along like that. That's the way we use that. So Johnson and Watson did a study in Scotland, and I have a hard time with that. That's a great name for a city. I don't know, anyway. Yeah, they did a study in Scotland. So this was on native speakers, of course, of English. And they compared analytic, synthetic, and mixed phonics programs. The study measured the ability from 1st through 3rd grade using standardized reading instruments and spelling instruments as well. They studied isolated word reading, spelling, and reading comprehension. And this was partially in response to whole language methods of teaching, where it was believed that children just needed to hear and see a lot of words and to learn English. And this was the alternative side. They were trying to say, well, which is more effective? Is it phonics? Is it synthetic phonics? Is it analytic phonics? Or some mix of everything? And so they did a comprehensive study across the board to see what worked in a native speaking environment. And what they found out was that the synthetic group was 7 years ahead of their age level in word reading and spelling. And the analytic group was average. Now, that's huge. They were dealing with, starting elementary school children. So that means that when they did the analysis and the assessment, the children were reading at 10th grade level. And for native speaking, that's a gigantic difference. What else that they found was the synthetic group was also better at reading irregular words than the whole language or the mixed groups. And that was definitely something that was surprising, because you would expect that phonetic rules wouldn't help you read a word that wasn't read phonetically. Right? Reading comprehension was also improved. So even though the main focus was on sounding out sounds, their ability to comprehend what they were reading was improved as well. It wasn't just the fluency being able to read out loud. And some interesting side effects were that it eliminated the gender gap between boys and girls in reading. Now traditionally there's a gender gap. Girls tend to read better than boys at younger levels in native environments. And it's thought that perhaps the systematic nature of it appealed to boys in a way that had problems with maybe in a whole language approach. Whereas some children are very good at picking out the pieces of the puzzle when you see a big puzzle in front of you. Other kids like to have the blocks and put it together for themselves. And so it's sort of like an opposite approach towards teaching a language. So perhaps that helped there. And it also eliminated the gap with disadvantaged children. And that's children from economically disadvantaged environments. The reasoning there was that perhaps children from more economically advantaged environments had more exposure to reading outside of school with their parents, or they had more exposure to extra tutoring outside of school. And even though that's with, this was conducted on native speaking children, you can see the same Juku kids who go to school, eikaiwas and stuff, and then come into public school and have an advantage over other children. And I've noticed in my experience in Nagahama that teaching in the public schools, that the children who go to Jukus generally have a substantial advantage over the other children. But since we started trying to do some of these techniques in that school, you've noticed the gap sort of narrow. It disappears because both groups of children then have the same set of rules to play off of to learn how to read and discover how to read the language. And it's also had the effect of increasing overall motivation and class participation as well. Now, in further support of this, America also did a study. National Reading Panel did a survey of academic research and came with basically the same results. Systematic synthetic phonics programs benefit both children beginning school and older readers with reading difficulties. And improved reading comprehension. And they called it a valuable and essential part of a successful classroom reading program. But they stressed it's a means and not an end. And I'd like to point that out as well. I've seen several phonics, ways of teaching phonics in public schools, at both the junior high and elementary school level. And I think when you treat it like an end, there's some of the misunderstanding is that you're teaching the letter, and you teach the sound of the letter, so you have to memorize this set of sounds for the letters. Of course you have to do that, but disconnected from a reading program, where they're actually learning how to read words, and read for meaning, and read for a communicative use of the language, if it's disconnected, then they won't remember it. It just becomes another set of arbitrary symbols that they have to remember. But if it's integrated into a reading program, then, and they can build on what they've learned, then it becomes something that they can take with them, and it becomes something that they can make their own, and then it becomes something more salient to them, and they remember it better. The goal of phonics is reading, and it's not to learn phonics, so that's an important thing to keep in mind, I think. So how should we teach phonics? Well, I think a synthetic phonics model is the most appropriate. Furthermore, instruction should be explicit. So when you're teaching phonics, they need to know why they're learning this weird sound for the letter. They need to understand what it can be used to do. And even with little children, it's easy to explain this. So that they can be able to read stories for themselves. It's not so that you can read what I'm showing you. It's so you can read what you like, what you're interested in. If they can understand that, then they want to read, and they want to try to do better at it. And this can also be mediated by using picture books. If the pictures are engaging and level appropriate, then the children will, what's going on here? They want to know. Yeah, there also needs to be a systematic logical sequence. So every step needs to build